I started working when I was 16 in my small suburban town outside a big city. At first, they had me helping the chef in the kitchen, cleaning up and doing little tasks. 2 months later, my boss told me that on the delivery boy's days off, I'd have to cover. I agreed without thinking much of it. Then, out of nowhere, the delivery boy quit. One night, after coming back from a delivery at a certain house, he looked completely shaken, his face pale, his eyes wide, like he'd just seen something terrible. He went straight into my boss's office, and they argued for about 15 minutes. When he came out, he just said, "Good luck, kid," patted me on the back, and left. I asked him why he was quitting, and he just shrugged. Just a shitty job, that's all. But I knew it was more than that. I never saw him again. For the next couple of weeks, I filled in as a delivery boy until my boss could find a replacement. About 2 weeks in, I got an address to deliver to like usual. I put it into the GPS and drove out, watching the sunset as I went. I figured it would be quick, 2 minutes tops, and then I could go home. Unfortunately, the house was way out in the rural part of town, where the homes were a quarter-mile apart. I pulled up to a 2-story house and immediately got an uneasy feeling. The lawn was overgrown with weeds, dead trees surrounded the property, and the old porch was bare, no chairs, no flower pots, nothing. It looked abandoned. Still, I grabbed a pizza and knocked on the door, silently hoping my boss had given me the wrong address. But then I heard the lock rattling. The door creaked open, and an old woman, at least 70, stood there. She had stringy white hair, missing teeth, and a frail, bony frame. But it was her eyes. The way she just glared at me made my stomach turn. Trying to keep it friendly, I smiled and said, "Pepperoni pizza, ma'am." "Yes," she croaked in a raspy voice. I held it out to her. "All right, here you go." But she didn't take it. She just stared at the box with a blank expression. Then, without looking at me, she asked, "Did you come with someone else?" I froze, my heart skipping a beat. No," I stammered. "Where's the other one?" she asked, still glaring. "He ran off on me last time he came." That sent chills down my spine. The other one? She must have meant the last delivery boy, the one who quit. She finally grabbed her purse and began digging through it, as if searching for money. But after nearly a minute of fumbling, she stopped. She didn't look confused or surprised. She just stared at me, like she was thinking about something. I could tell her right hand was gripping something inside the purse. But I couldn't see what. My mind raced. Was it pepper spray? A knife? A gun? Then I noticed movement behind her. A shadow. The silhouette of a man approaching the doorway. Suddenly, I heard crunching leaves to my left near the porch, followed by a deep male voice. "Hey!" I turned my head and saw the angry face of a middle-aged man peering at me over the porch railing. He started climbing up toward me. That was it. I bolted. I ran to my car, threw the pizza onto the passenger seat, fired up the engine, and sped off without looking back. My heart was pounding the whole way. I had to lie and tell my boss the customer refused the order, paying for the pizza out of my own pocket. But honestly, it was worth every penny. A few days later, after I decided to quit, I told my boss the truth about what happened. His face went pale. He said the last delivery boy, James, had told him something similar, that he walked out of there because something wasn't right. My boss ended up calling the cops. 2 days later, he called me back. The police had investigated and discovered the house had been foreclosed for over a year. But inside, they found 3 people living there illegally, 2 men and the old woman. They were arrested, but my boss never told me much more than that. To this day, I'm still traumatized. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I had stayed any longer. If I had actually waited, they could have easily jumped me. Thank God I quit afterwards. I'm just grateful I'm still alive. I'll never forget another time I was covering for my friend's shift at the pizzeria. He was a usual delivery boy, while I normally worked the register. That night, I made 2 normal deliveries to regular customers. Then, just before closing, my manager handed me one final delivery. It was 5 miles away, longer than I was used to driving. The GPS led me off the highway into a quiet little town I'd never even heard of. The The streets were eerily empty, and half of the streetlights were out. The whole place had a dead, unsettling atmosphere. I just wanted to drop the pizza off and get out. The house was a small, single-story place. I rang the bell, and almost immediately the door swung open. An older man, maybe his late 50s, stood there. His few remaining hairs were gray, and his pale face was framed by a matching mustache. He smiled at me in a way that didn't sit right. "I'll be right back," he said, before disappearing into the house. I stood there in the cold, shifting uncomfortably. Something about him in the town put me on edge. A few minutes later, he returned with another smile. "You should come inside where it's warm," he said. I declined politely, but he kept insisting, gesturing for me to step in. I can't justify what I did next, but it was freezing that night, maybe 5 degrees out. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The door shut behind me. My stomach tightened. The house wasn't even warm. In fact, it barely seemed to have a heating system at all. As the minutes dragged on, I found myself inching closer to the door. The man reappeared, smiling again, and then opened a door leading down to a basement. "I usually keep my money down there," he said casually. "Why don't you come down with me?" Even from where I stood, I could see the basement was pitch black. My gut told me no. I refused. Then, faint but clear, I heard the sound of a creaking step from below. Someone else was already down there. That's when my instincts screamed at me to leave. I turned toward the door, only to find the man right behind me. I panicked. I swung and punched him in the face, managing to get him in a hold for a moment. But then I heard heavy footsteps charging up the basement stairs. I shoved the man to the floor, bolted outside, and sprinted to my car. I didn't look back. I just floored it, driving as fast as I could into the night. Later, I told my manager everything. He called the cops, but I never heard what came of it. He gave me a few days off to recover, and I'll tell you this, ever since that night, I've learned a lesson the hard way. Never step into a stranger's house during a delivery. There was one more time I had a close call. I was out late one night, making what turned out to be the longest delivery I'd ever done, about 20 minutes from the shop. The customer had ordered 4 large pies, so I assumed it was for a party. Honestly, I was kind of excited, thinking I might get a good tip out of it. But when I arrived, my excitement died instantly. The address was an old, run-down building sitting in the middle of a forest clearing. No cars, no lights, just a dark, decaying structure that didn't look lived in at all. I put the car in park, grabbed my phone, and called my boss. I asked him to read the address back at least 3 times to make sure I typed it in right. He checked it and said it was correct. I could tell he was in a really bad mood, and he told me to at least knock on the door and check it out. He normally got mad if we returned a pie, and I was terrified of what he'd do if I brought back 4. I was insanely unnerved, but I forced myself to the front of the building. There was no doorbell, so I knocked hard. I heard nothing, which I half expected, and I was starting to think the whole thing was a waste of time. I knocked one more time out of desperation. Then I heard rustling from inside. I knocked and yelled, "Pizza!" There was silence again. I felt worse than before. As I was about to turn away, something at the window caught my eye. Someone was looking through it. I couldn't tell it was a man or a woman. All I could see were their eyes, open wider than I'd ever seen. They stared at me, unblinking. I got so disturbed I dropped the pizzas and ran back to my car. The damn thing wouldn't start until I turned the key a 3rd time. I drove off the grass and back onto the dirt road, but the car felt weird, rocking and bumping like something was wrong. I didn't make it far before I heard a sharp scraping sound from outside. There was so much resistance I couldn't even drive. The car came to a stop. I got out to check, and a chill ran up my spine. My heart was pounding. All 4 tires had been slashed. The rims were sitting on the ground. I realized somebody must have done it while I was at the door. Instead of running, I climbed back in, locked the doors, and tried to stay calm. I was so close to that building I could practically see it through the trees. I dialed 911 and explained everything. The operator told me the cops would be there as soon as possible and instructed me to stay in the car with the doors locked while she stayed on the line. My whole body was shaking. The forest around me looked endless and black. I knew it would take a while for police to arrive. Then the thing that still haunts me happened. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and there she was, the same person I had seen at the window. It was a woman. Her eyes were wider than ever, and a small smile was starting to spread across her face. I couldn't stay another second. I opened the door and sprinted into the woods, not caring how loud I was. I ran until I was out of breath and collapsed behind a giant fallen log, trying to muffle my breathing with my hands. I waited what felt like hours until I finally heard sirens in the distance. When I had enough energy, I ran back toward the dirt road. The red and blue lights came into view, and I'd never felt such relief in my life. The officers were parked in front of my car, shining flashlights and inspecting the scene. I burst out yelling for help, collapsed to the ground, and gagged from exhaustion. They questioned me, and I told them everything. 2 officers went to search the building. They came back with nothing living inside, but they did find a couple of spiky objects, the same kind used to slash my tires. The cops guessed it might have been some sick, delinquent couple, since I'd seen the woman, but they were never found. That still eats at me. I quit that job right after. I started working at a local grocery store. I know I'll never forget the way that woman looked through my rearview mirror, the smile, the eyes, and I still get chills thinking about it.